The meaning and mission of Jesus. Given the historical circumstances, it is difficult to determine what the mission of Jesus was exactly. The best assumption is that it was an effort to reform the Judaic religion by bringing new elements into it and by fulfilling trends that had been instituted into Judaism from the time of the Babylonian captivity, from the time of the Talmud. The organizations, churches established after his death developed in directions his teachings do not seem to indicate. In this section, we will consider things which seem to be ideas taught by Jesus, mythic pardigams enacted by his actions and developments from his teachings that do not seem to be entirely motivated by coercive utility wielded by organized Christianity. The end of animal sacrifice. One interesting aspect of the mission of Jesus, which is perhaps the most essential from the standpoint of Christian ideology, but which often goes unnoticed from the Zoroastrian perspective, is the abolition of animal sacrifice, which the mythic interpretation of the death of Jesus instituted. Zarathustra opposed animal sacrifice on two counts: the cruelty to the soul of the ox, the animal soul, and two, the sacrifices being practiced by the warrior class in his own day were seen as being excessive and therefore evil. Before going any further, however, we need to review what is meant by animal sacrifice in the two traditions in question, the Indo-European and the Hebraic. The Indo-European sacrifice of the kind, the cult out of which Zoroastrianism emerged around 3,700 years ago, would sacrifice an animal in quick and relatively painless way, divide the animal parts into two categories: the parts that the humans wanted to eat, and two, the parts they did not want to eat. The latter were deemed to be the portion to be given to the gods. Typically, these were the heads, forelegs, internal organs, etc. These parts were deposited in the earth, water, or burned. The different gods and goddesses demanded different rituals. The meat from the animal was then consumed by humans in a convivial meal in which the gods shared. In a manner of speaking, these rituals were sacralized versions of the normal process of butchering animals for consumption. Zarathustra's complaint was that it was excessive, and it probably meant that more animals were being killed than could be eaten. The overall purpose of the Indo-European animal sacrifice is the exchange of the gifts between men and the gods, to commune with the gods, and to bind the tribe to its gods ritually. By contrast, the purpose of the Hebraic animal sacrifice was the forgiveness of sins. Before the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in 70 CE, the Judaic cult was centered on the temple complex and its activities. One of the main activities of this complex was animal sacrifice. The procedure went like this. A man would bring an animal, a goat, most usually a lamb, the mount and sacrificial altar in the courtyard of the temple. There he would be met with the sacrificial priest, who had him confess his sins. While laying his hands on the animal, his sin was then thought to be transferred to the blood of the animal. The priest would cut then the throat of the animal, allow the blood to run off the altar into the gutters around its edges. The blood was then thought to be unclean. The body of the animal was then transferred to the brazen altar, a furnace, where the body would be consumed as burnt offering to Jehovah. This context shows a number of things. The type of animal sacrifice practiced by Indo-Europeans and the Hebrews had little in common. The death of Jesus was mythologized to make the sacrifice of his life a substitute for all future animal sacrifices in the Judaic context. He became the Lamb of God, i.e. the substitute for the sacrificial lambs, through the sacrifice of which the contemporary Jews had their sins washed away or forgiven. So the meaning of Jesus' death was the end of the necessity of animal sacrifice. So the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, this type of cultic activity ceased, as well as the Jews began to worship with prayer in synagogues in a manner of the Pharisees' teachings. Other major features of Christianity, which could very well stem from the Muslim way, are balance. I would not be the first to observe that Jesus seems to be on a mission to bring balance to the world of the contemporary Jews. He found a world bound by considerations of law, Torah, lacking in love. Some have speculated that his word operating formula was love. In attempting this, he is applying the principle of balance between the extremes, which is one of the most important Muslim principles, and one which we have seen several times in these essays. Individual salvation. One of the main tenets of Zoroastrianism is that the individual is a sovereign entity and is destined for perfection and immortality as an individual. This is one of the most revolutionary ideas that Jesus has introduced to the Judaic world. The Jews then and now believe in a collective salvation or a coming age of resurrected righteous people, but this will only come to the whole of the Jewish population as a group, not as individuals. The idea of a final resurrection and unanimously agreed upon in the time of Jesus by all Jews. Some believed in no afterlife at all, as we have seen. The ideas coming Messiah and final resurrection of the dead are both ideas imported into Judaism from Iran. But Jesus teaches the revolutionary idea of individual salvation, emphasis of good versus evil. One of the main practices for Jesus is best known in his magical ability to cast out evil or unclean spirits. This is common formula in the New Testament, but it only alluded to the once in the Old Testament, and it is connected to the magical practice. Clearly, this was not a common Jewish belief or practice, but one which Jesus emphasized in his mission. This is obviously an influence from Zoroastrian ideology of the Azatas and the Devas, or the angels and demons, being influential in people's lives. It is actually sophisticated understanding of the Devas to model them as a dysfunctional particles or mechanisms, such as a disability of the mind, eye, or limb, rather than as an imp or personalized anthropomorphized spirit. By the same token, Christian belief, the idea of the angel was one of the spiritual entity, like it is in the Zoroastrianism, rather than the almost materialistic entity that seemed to be often described in the Old Testament. They appear as men. See, for example, Genesis 18.2 and 19.16. The now familiar concept of God and his angels locked in mortal combat with the forces of Satan, which culminates in the Christian mythology and the visionary text called Revelation, is only possible with the influence of Iranian models. The old Jewish concept of Satan is reflected in the book of Job. There we've seen God and Satan friendly terms, taking bets on whether Satan can make Job lose his faith in God. In the old Jewish concept, Satan is one that prosecutes man in the court of God, but he is still an officer of the court. In the religion of Jesus, Satan has been recast into the pure opponent of all that is good in the image of Angra Mainyu. Zoroastrianism has a clear idea of heaven and hell. Other religions adopted the idea of Christianity, perhaps emphasized it more than the other religions. Jesus himself does not seem to dwell on this idea, but the organized church, which was to follow, did. They did so in a misguided way, but an effective way for their purposes. Power and control. The original Mazdan function of hell is a place of punishment for misdeeds, bad thoughts, bad words, bad actions, but it is not eternal. It lasts as long as is necessary. The Zoroastrians envisioned that there would be a guardian to oversee the punishments so that no one is more severe than the misdeed warrants. For the Zoroastrian, hell is a place of painful purification and a place for the leveling of depths. Some sects which believed in reincarnation just placed the soul of hellbound individual in an undesirable body of life. The merit of living person gains by being kind to others is connected to the idea in the Christian dogma. Hell becomes a place of eternal punishment and damnation. This is a doctrine that was promulgated as control mechanism. The church attempted to control human behavior through fear, just as the most religions have used this idea. The temptation to use it this way was too great to forgo, given their lust for power and control. The Zoroastrian doctrine just seems based on a certain metaphysical logic. Ahura Mazda created man, while he provided with the power of choice between good and evil. Most volunteers to incarnate on earth to fight for good against evil. Sometimes man misuses the freedom of choice and does bad. For each of these bad actions, there is a reflex action now or later. Debts are incurred and must be paid. If the individual is judged at the Kinvat Bridge to have done more good than bad, he or she will pass on, and the punishing river of fire will feel like a bath in warm milk. These are all poetic metaphors to express the idea that the practitioner of Humata Hukta Kvarsta will be alleviated from the punishments, not by the unearned grace of God, but due to the good choices made in life. Jesus certainly emphasized the love and care for the weakest members of society, the poor, if you will. This attitude was expressed by Zarathustra in his desire to protect the poor, the defenseless, and the helpless creatures of the environment, etc. The attitude in the case of Zarathustra is one of strength. The truly strong do not despise the weak. To despise something is to fear it on some level. The Mazda strives to be fearless and thus without hate.